welcome back to another episode of My Father Before Me, a regular segment where we bring together nerds from different generations to appreciate and discuss the films that define the culture and made us who we are today. I'm your host, Brennan Sem. Joining me, as usual, is the chairman of the committee and my very own Muay Thai master, my father, Tory. How are you doing today, Dad?
Excellent. I didn't know there was committee meetings. I didn't sign on for that kind of commitment.
Yeah, well, it's not a very intensive committee.
Okay, good.
There's very few actual meetings.
We'll post the minutes later.
Yeah, somebody's got to be taking care of this. But what are we going to be discussing today?
Oh, today I wanted to get back to. So we did our Schwarzenegger. We did our Running Man, right?
Yes.
And we talked about doing some other Schwarzeneggers, and we'll probably get back to that. But I wanted to get into another action star from I'd say more the late 80s, early 90s, and that's the good old JCVD, our Jean Claude Van Damme.
Yes.
Who's still around. He's still doing some stuff. I saw something, a series on Prime he's doing that might be worth a viewing. Kind of a self-aware thing, I guess. It's the Jean Claude Van Johnson or something. I don't know.
Oh, well, that's a great name.
Yes.
Yeah, here we go.
Anything. One of the trailers for one of the pretend movies in their show looked pretty good. Huckleberry, and he's kicking everybody's butt. Yeah. Huckleberry Finn.
Well, for starters, I mean, this poster here is just amazing. We got him sitting on himself doing the splits.
Definitely. I'm kind of curious about it. You know, I'm in my Amazon Prime break right now, but one of these days when I get back on there, like I always do, I'll probably throw that series back on. But, you know, of course, he was in The Expendables, so he's kind of a name when it comes to the action genre.
Oh, yeah, definitely.
You know, and a very specific kind of action, too. You know, I mean, you could compare him maybe to some of the other karate masters, but I'm not sure. The muscles from Brussels.
Yeah, definitely. No, I would say, yeah. I mean, I think these are my first two JCVD movies I've ever actually seen.
Okay, they're great ones then.
Yeah, my only reference for him is, well, okay, I knew that the first movie we're going to be talking about today existed, but I'd never seen it. The only reference I have for him isn't from like Psych or anything like we normally do.
Right.
It's from an episode of Friends where it's early on when Ross's monkey is filming a movie and JCVD's on set, and there's a bit of a squabble between Rachel and Monica.
I think I remember something about that. Yeah.
And in that episode, she actually name drops the second movie that we're discussing today, where he totally saves time.
Well, okay, so yeah, the movies we're talking about, the two I wanted to focus on, and as I was thinking about it, it's kind of, for me, it's kind of the beginning and then the tail off end of my Jean Claude Van Damme, which we're going to talk Kickboxer from '89, which is the first classic, which is kind of his introduction. But then Timecop is kind of his way out. You know, if you look at his filmography around then, that's the way. And we'll get into that when we get towards the end of things a little bit. I mean, obviously he did quite a bit after that. And I think in that same year, like some of the other ones that we aren't going to cover, that aren't necessarily streaming very well anywhere, which is why we have our Street Fighter. There is, Hard Target. You know, he did a bunch. You know, between the movies we're talking about, there are a bunch of them that are all very similar.
Yeah, so '89, she had a 5-year tenure as king of the B action.
I kind of think so, and that's why and I do have to say, going back and revisiting, I wonder why, but it didn't lead up to what I remember. You know, it's been a while. Jean Claude Van Damme isn't somebody I go back and rewatch very often, but it's been a while since I've seen some of these, and I started to see some flaws that didn't hold up. Maybe so we did Firewalker with good old Chuck Norris, right? So
that's right.
I kind of compare certainly what we saw in Kickboxer. It really reminded me a lot more of Chuck Norris than I remembered, in the way that the fighting when it happens is slow and. You know, it's 1-2 kicks, they're down, and
there's a million cuts in the middle of the fight. Like every shot is a different camera angle.
Like I saw one YouTuber mention, they made the movie longer by making every hit have 3 shots. That way it could extend out the movie, and stuff. So.
Yeah, and I hate that. I hate that. And that's not. I mean, that's not necessarily just a JCVD type thing. I mean, that's like martial art movie staple. But I hate when we get the same shot from 3 different points of view.
Well, and you get to things like the Matrix where they specifically wanted to do long shots, with multiple moves in a shot, and that sort of thing. And you start to see a little bit more. You can see a little bit more. And when we're talking Jean Claude Van Damme, I mean, obviously the dude can do his stuff.
Oh, yeah.
Right. But there's still, it's not like some of those Marvel movies. The reason they have 12 cuts for every fight, every punch is because the actors maybe can't do it the best.
Sure.
Right. But that's not the case here. Obviously, this dude knows what he's doing. It's just, you're right. It's a different kind of editing that reminded me of the good old Chuck Norris. So.
Yeah, I definitely see that. It is kind of telling, to be honest. I had completely forgotten we talked about those movies. What we did, that was when we were doing Lou Gossett Jr.
Yes, so, that was our first Louis Gossett before we got to the good Enemy Mine.
Yeah, I completely forgot about that entirely. But I will say that Kickboxer was, I will say, the lesser of the two, in my opinion.
Yes.
It definitely, when you get into it just from the beginning, you can tell it is a martial arts movie first and foremost. Whereas like Timecop, and we'll talk more about this later, but Timecop actually feels a bit more like a movie. This is just like a martial arts thing.
It definitely is. And Kickboxer, I think, I want to say, so Jean Claude Van Damme, his first major outing, I think, U.S. film-wise, was Bloodsport, which I didn't see because at the time it was rated R, and at the time I was younger. And I never got around to watching that one. So this was kind of Kickboxer was kind of his first main outing, of course, that I saw, but also, kind of a more palpable in that way, I guess.
And that's one thing that I was sort of questioning like throughout this movie is, why is Kickboxer rated R? I mean, obviously I get it because, they use a couple F-bombs and there's one thing later in the movie that's certainly a bit questionable with Maya Lee. But this doesn't seem like the kind of movie that should be rated R. Like it should just be 88. So this would be after Triple. It should just be PG-13. And I think if you had like, obviously the viewing audience would have been much larger. I feel like it would be an even bigger thing than it is now.
I think so. I think if this was the PG-13, then you're hitting that audience and stuff. Like I said, I still saw it at the time. I would have been 13 years old when it came out. I'm awful sure it's probably an HBO thing.
Yeah.
But it's definitely it is a light one, which is why, like I said, I never saw Bloodsport because it was rated R. But then again, I remember seeing Kickboxer early, so like you say, it's a more tame type of thing, I guess. So.
Definitely, yeah. I mean, the R-rated thing is just because there's like 5 F-bombs throughout it, and then obviously the one thing. But other than that, like there's obviously some gore in here, but it's not like over the top.
I mean, they're fighting with broken glass on their hands. You could get rated R out of that.
Oh,
right?
Yeah. Oh, well, yeah. And I mean, that's one thing. One of my complaints in this is that in that final fight, like Jean Claude Van Damme is just like not taking any damage. I mean, he gets like the one cut across his stomach, which the effect actually looks pretty decent on. But then after that, he's getting punched in the face like 6 times and nothing happens. Like he's got like a black eye.
Well, he's Jean Claude Van Damme. And it was telling in that fight. And like I said, it's been a while since I've revisited, but that one was extremely obvious. The first few rounds, he didn't land one punch. Oh, yeah. And he got beat up and he's losing until the last round, and he kicks, he takes care of it. And at that point, the other guy doesn't land one punch. He just stands there and gets beaten on, and stuff. So you can see, and that's where I think it feels a little bit like the Chuck Norris thing, right? Or the Firewalker thing. I don't know all Chuck Norris movies, but the Firewalker, at least it was every time Chuck Norris needed to beat a guy, they'd have a guy just stand there and get hit, and it's the same kind of thing. And it certainly felt that way. I mean, there was one, when he's actually in the ring for that one fight and they're going back and forth doing the kicking in the sides. I guess that's a reference to Bloodsport. I guess that was a big thing in Bloodsport where he actually wins a match by just trading punches until the other guy gets too tired, and doing it that way. So, but in this instance, it looked kind of lame, it didn't quite hold up. It's like, okay, what are we doing here? I know you're scoring points because it's a sanctioned kickboxing match or whatever. I'm sure there's some kind of point system or something that they're getting out of that.
Yeah. Well, and that is one thing that I did like about this movie is that it is, like you said, it's the first, 4 rounds. It's just Jean Claude just standing there. And then the last round, it's just Tong Po standing there. Mm-hmm. But they did that. And at the least, they explained it.
Yes.
They're like, we're going to give a reason why this fight scene is the most boring thing that's ever happened in the history of this film. I don't know. It was definitely a weird thing. It felt like this whole B plot with Freddie Lee and him, exerting the corruption of whatever. Right. That was just like non-existent until they needed it. It
didn't mean anything until I guess you come in and you have the one little scene where he defends the little grocery store.
Yeah.
Right. Because he's taking hush money or taking protection money or whatever, and that sort of thing. But beyond that, it's awful useless. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, and they even have a line there where, Miley says like 6 times about how, it's just going to come down on me. It doesn't matter that you did it and not me. I'm going to feel the pain from this. And nothing happens.
Right.
Like there's no part where the goons actually come back and do anything to Miley except for
at the very end. But that's targeting her as his girlfriend kind of thing, not necessarily because of the protection money kerfuffle, or anything like that.
Yeah, they went so far as to talk about the fact that there's corruption here and all this, and they bought the police, but then they never actually show anything about that.
Right. I will say, with Kickboxer, so we're talking Jean Claude Van Damme. There was another movie that he put out probably more towards the time that Timecop came out called Quest. And I remember that one, they're The Quest, yes. And I was kind of getting the two in my head. I get the two kind of back and forth, because that's more of a, he gets recruited into this fighting tournament and stuff. And I remember that movie, and I checked and it wasn't streaming anywhere. But that one's got, it feels like an old, it feels like one of those old, kung fu movies where there are so many fighters in this tournament. They're all supposed to be the best of their the best of their world, but they're very specific. Like I know there's an African fighter who's very, feels like the Zulu tribe kind of martial arts.
Oh, sure.
And so, of course I'm no martial arts expert. And then there's an American who's just there to box and punch and do that kind of thing. Yeah, like you, Kong. But it's so. I would say from if we go to that one, which I think you had it up on the screen, it was like 96, right? By then, I feel like things were a little bit better. Even though that movie actually, I think it kind of flopped. It did a lot less, But that's another one that I remember seeing in HBO. So if we're talking Jean Claude Van Damme, if we want to take a look at kickboxer movies, I'm comparing those two, and I get it stuck in my head, and I think there were some fight scenes from that Quest that I remember back in the day that actually became in my head became Kickboxer. And then I realized once we watched this, we reviewed it, that Kickboxer is kind of boring.
Yeah, definitely a little bit. It is mostly just the training montage, but it's not like an exciting training montage. It's not like watching Rocky, but it is interesting, and I think that's one of the reasons that. I'm glad you brought up like the sort of various like martial arts aspect. I think that's one of the reasons that this movie is popular, and it's one of the only reasons that I'd heard of the name is because this film played a really large part in like bringing Muay Thai over to the U.S.
Right.
Which is legitimately like a very brutal sport, and they train crazy. Like watching even modern Muay Thai stuff is kind of insane.
Well, and it is interesting because his brother, who gets his back broken, I don't know if you saw this, he actually is a Muay Thai champion.
Yeah, Dennis.
Alexio. Which he wasn't an actor, obviously.
Yeah.
But he is he had the belt. He was a champion. It's not the same belt as what they showed, I guess, in the movie. But he is an official Muay Thai champion out there. So, like you say, the sport is or kickbox. I don't know if it's I could
think
be
it
wrong.
was
Maybe it's
kickboxing.
kickboxing.
World light heavyweight and world cruiserweight. That's another thing. Like I understand, but one thing that sort of irritates me with like fighting movies, whether it's this or like the Rocky movies, everybody's always a heavyweight, even though it's obvious that they don't weigh enough. Like these guys are way too small. Not only do they not weigh enough, they're way too short to be involved here. I get it, because heavyweight's cool. You know, it's like cool to think about these big, massive guys throwing these punches, and you think of most of the most famous boxers have all been heavyweights. You know, Muhammad Ali, Joe Frazier, but it is really irritating as somebody who is a fan of fighting. It's hard to watch.
Yes. I wondered, and that was part of the reason that I wanted to get this one on the list and take a look at it, was because I knew, you know, you follow the UFC and that sort of thing a little bit. So I wondered if that would help. I don't know if it did, but
well, it definitely, I mean, it pulled me in right from the beginning, because we see what's the brother's name? Eric. He's actually fighting, and I like when they do this, even though it means nothing. He's fighting for an actual like kickboxing federation, the ISKA or whatever. I like when they do stuff like that, rather than just, you know, put him in a ring. And pretend.
Well, and I think they even say in the trivia that the title they announced for him, he actually had, you know,
that's
or
cool.
something like that. But it is interesting. And I do have to say, you know, we're kind of picking on Kickboxer a little bit, but it did kick off quite a series. I mean, there's like 6 of them.
Oh, wow.
I mean, so Kickboxer 2, Tong Po comes back, and our Van Damme, it's not Van Damme, actually Tong Po shoots him.
Oh my god.
Shoots him right in the head. There's a shot of him just laying there, you know, because there's somebody talks about how Tong Po ruined our chance at revenge or honor or whatever. And he's down on, so I think it's a cousin or something. I don't know, but it comes back and does the same thing. But
brother.
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 Oh yeah,
brother.
Another brother they didn't even mention in the movie.
No,
in our movie is going to take care of things. So.
Well, so, and I will say they did take the time to explain Jean Claude Van Damme's accent, which I appreciated.
Yes.
You know, they're brothers, but one was raised in Europe and the other was raised.
They definitely
in the US.
wanted to point that out, because that's so. As soon as he said brother, I'm like, yeah,
sure,
yeah,
yeah. That's, I will say, Jean Claude Van Damme, and again, you're not really expecting it. It's a martial arts movie. Not a tremendous actor, especially in this.
Well, this is his early years. I think he, you know, in later years, I mean, he's Jean Claude Van Damme, but as far as an action actor,
yeah,
I think we're doing okay.
Definitely.
You know, he's acceptable in that range.
His English is at least as good as Arnold's.
Right.
Yeah.
And I've listened to, and like I said, I just saw that thing on the Prime popping up. And I listened to an interview, and he sounds like he's kind of a goof, you know, when he does that stuff.
Yeah, there were a few line reads where it was difficult to understand what he was saying.
Yeah.
But there was one line in particular, there was one shot in particular that really stuck out to me where I was like, okay, like I get that you're not American, but this is tough to watch. And it's the scene immediately after his brother is put in the hospital and he learns that he's paralyzed, and Jean Claude Van Damme's like crying.
Yes,
says, I want Tong Po or whatever.
It was pretty intense.
Yeah, I didn't think that was really good at all.
I know there is a deleted scene actually that we didn't get, that I saw somewhere else, where it's actually a little bit of an extra scene in there where they are in the hospital, and of course his brother's in bed, and he's talking to him, and his brother actually asked him to, avenge him and stuff like that. And they talk about how he's never, and so that was, what's his name? I forget his name already.
Dennis Alexio.
Dennis Alexio's chance to try, and for some reason they cut it out of the movie, so it must not have worked out too well.
Yeah, that's tough. That's one thing that I wish they had sort of paid it more than one scene to. Like when the brother is in the hospital, like Jean Claude Van Damme, they have this thing, you know, it's all for his brother. Mm-hmm. And Taylor is like, I'll be back to take you to see him in the hospital. But then we only get the one scene, and it's like a half a second where all he does is wipe some sweat off of his brow, and then he's back to training. I wish that we had a little bit more of the interaction between the two of them. if for no other reason, then it would have been interesting. And again, obviously he's not a tremendous actor,
Right.
but it would have been nice to have seen a thing from the brother where he's like, a little bit resentful. Like we get hints of that,
Right.
but it's not. It just doesn't really show up.
Well, and there's not a lot of lead in either to a lot of the things they did. Like when they're at the very beginning of the movie, they're in the park practicing or whatever, and he says, "Don't be doing that tippy tappy stuff. It's power, right?" So I'm thinking that, and again, I've seen this before, but even so, it didn't land too hard. I'm trying to remember, does that come back? Like, does he dodge Tom Poe or something so that he survives because Jean Claude started out as a ballet dancer, right? So I'm wondering, are they going to kind of put that in there where it's, he's got the moves to get away from him and that's how he survives or something like that. But that never comes back. The only thing that comes up is that he learns to kick a tree hard, so that he can beat the guy who can kick the post in the training room hard.
Yeah, shake the plaster down. Yeah, no, that's actually a good point. I had forgotten that. Yeah, there was no addressing of that at all. And I mean, there's the only like tippy tap thing we get is when the old wise man Xian, when Jean Claude Van Damme first meets him and he's like, how's your defense? And Xian does 13 punches in like a half a second, which is edited really terribly. Yes. Which is just a terrible shot. But like that's all tippy tappy and stuff. And they just don't mention it.
No, they spend a lot of time training with the big sticks, but that's about it.
Yeah. It was definitely a little bit wanting here.
I do have to say the one other thing I wanted to bring up. I know we want to move on to Timecop here soon, but the Tong Po, the actor, he's credited in Kickboxer as himself. That's not his real name. Oh. I don't know why they credited him that way. But that dude, I guess him and Jean Claude are actually real good friends. And they did a lot of the choreography, worked out the choreography themselves. And he's been his stunt double on a lot of things. Like was a movie Jean Claude was in, the Cyborg, where he was a stunt double. And if you dig into his credits, I mean, that dude has done a lot of stunts. But I guess it's one of those things where he was training with Jean Claude, and when they were setting up the Kickboxer movie, they said, well, we need a large Malaysian man or whatever to be able to, be Tong Po and stuff. And they couldn't find anyone. And he went in and tried out, so he got picked. But other than that, I think, it said they were real good friends. They worked well together. They were trainers together. They did a lot, and he was his stunt man on a lot of things. So I thought that was kind of interesting.
That is cool. I didn't realize that. You wouldn't expect them to be stunt doubles,
right?
or wouldn't expect him to be his stunt double after seeing him in this movie.
He's definitely a larger man.
Yeah.
But I suppose he play with fun camera tricks, and he's got a similar chest. Maybe.
Oh yeah, I guess you show him from the back, doing flips and stuff. One final thing that I wanted to say in this movie is that the like old temple where they do their final fight, that is a map in the UFC game.
Oh, that's fun.
I can't remember if it's UFC 3 or 4. Which one's the most recent one? 4 is most recent, so I think it's in 3.
Well, I'm glad that they're paying homage.
I'm sorry, I'm all wrong. I think it's in 4 because 5 is the most recent. Can you tell I haven't played the game in a very long time? But yeah, so that's one of the things. I didn't know that it was from this movie, but when we watched it, I was like, I fought there.
That's fun.
I've punched Kimbo Slice in the face there.
That's nice. I like the way they do that. Well, I mean, like I said, it's a maybe it's a touchstone, maybe it isn't. I don't know. We'll find out how many people actually watch this video or comment.
Yeah, we'll see.
But I am kind of curious. The best part about the Kickboxer though is the dipping the hands in the resin and then putting the glass on. Oh yeah. And the best part about that is it's 8 in Hot Shots Part 2.
Oh, is it really?
Yes. So they have a scene, and you'll have to look it up, where of course it's I can't remember the dude's name now, but they set it up, and he's going in for the fight, and he wraps his hands, and then he dips it in caramel sauce, and then he has he's got the whole, there's gummy bears, and there's it's great. It's great stuff. So
that is another movie that I completely forgot existed. Hot Shots. Wow.
Well, that's Part 2.
Part 2. So, yeah. I don't even know if I've seen that one. I think I've only seen the first one.
Well, then you're missing out. Quality stuff.
Definitely. There was one other thing that I definitely wanted to say, which I forgot because I made a specific note about it, and I don't normally mention this, but the lighting throughout this entire movie was terrible. It was terrible. Oh man, the entire time it was difficult. Anytime it was night or we were inside a building, it was like there's no contrast here. Oh, it was so frustrating.
That's too bad.
But I would say Kickboxer was pretty fun. It's definitely an enjoyable watch. Definitely not one of the better movies that we've discussed on My Father Before Me.
No.
And definitely not as good as the movie that we'll be discussing after this break. We'll be talking about Timecop from 1994. And, I bumbled that end. Oh, dang it. We'll be back after a quick break.
That's right.
Wow. Nailed it. These days, it's hard to know what's worth watching in the little free time you have at the end of the day.
We know you work hard and don't want to spend hours searching for the perfect movie.
So make things easier on yourself.
Let us do the looking for you.
Take a break from work and experience cinema.
Then come back and see if we like the movie as much as you.
With the New Wave Nerds, you can spend less time looking and more time watching and enjoying your day off.
Subscribe today.
And we're back. Now, Dad, why don't you go ahead and give us the rundown on what we're going to be talking about this time?
I would, but somebody went back in the past and changed it, and now I don't know for sure.
Oh, no. It's been erased.
Yeah, so like I said, we're talking Jean Claude Van Damme, early for me. I mean, obviously, he's been around before that, and late for me. Obviously, he's been around after this. Is Timecop is another big one, and it was his. I think as it said something like as of 2024, it's his highest grossing film.
Really?
So, I mean, obviously, I would argue one of his bigger hits, as you mentioned before, maybe one of his more commercial movies, or felt like a movie story. And part of that, it may be because it's based off a Dark Horse comic series. So maybe that gives us a little bit of something to build off of or something to attach to, that gives us some series.
An established storyline.
Right.
I did see that the guy who wrote the screenplay is actually the creator of the comics, Mark Verheiden.
Okay.
Who I actually know from some Superman comics.
Excellent.
Superman, Batman, Volume 5. I don't know. Anyways, Superman comics. Pretty good. Not my favorite, but.
Yeah. I'm curious about it. Like I said, I didn't know it was a comic. I knew it was a movie. So
I feel like it's definitely the type of thing that if it's going to be a movie, should not be crunched down into an hour 45 of just Jean Claude Van Damme. I bet the story of the comic, I'm sure it would actually be pretty fun and enjoyable.
I wonder, I could see a quantum leap, going into the past of the week kind of thing, which actually it did spin off into a series. I think it said there's a series in 97.
Oh.
If you look at a couple of the shots, it looked cheap.
Oh, sure.
And I don't think it lasted very long. I think there was also a sequel at some point, too, that they did, but that didn't fly too far.
Yeah, probably another straight to video.
Right, I think so. I think it's a fun story. Obviously, you run into time travel and you're going to get the people who are time travel purists like, no, that's not how it would work, or that's not going to happen that way, or that kind of thing. I mean, they have some of the elements of it, like our bad guy gets a cut on his cheek, and then the old bad guy gets a scar suddenly appears, that kind of thing. And obviously they're playing with the idea that changing things in the past makes the future better, or makes your present better. I guess they specifically say you can't go in the future because it hasn't happened yet.
Yeah.
So that's interesting.
Which, I wasn't quite sure about that. That didn't make much sense. Sidebar, the comic, I had assumed it was going to be like, an 8 to 12 issue run. It's only 3. So there's not that much. It's not that much
It's a
more
quick
time.
little Dark Horse comics.
But in any case, this movie, like I said in the outset, this is a much better film. It was certainly enjoyable. You could tell that it was mid 90s. The effects are definitely pretty good in this. I will say, there was one at the end which was god awful, but
matter can't occupy the same space, and it definitely can't be shown on screen. So.
No. But the effect of them actually going back in time, I really enjoy that, especially in the beginning when we first see Jean Claude Van Damme appear in the Great Depression. Or
right.
whatever.
Yeah. It's just kind of that little wormhole in space kind of thing, which, okay. So I'm thinking to myself, he's in a sled and then all of a sudden he's just walking calmly through time. So I'm curious about the in between there, how you get out of the quid and then you're the sled and you're stepping through the wormhole, but it still looks pretty cool.
It does look cool. Well, but then also, not only do they go there in the sled, when he comes back, he's in the sled, you know? And it's not like the type of thing where he goes back into it and then he just presses a button and they somehow end up back in the sled.
Well, and the scene you're talking about, they come back in time or to the present by falling. You know, they're falling outside the building. So how do they fall? Land inside a sled? They're sitting fine in two seats. Again, I don't think we're supposed to worry about that necessarily.
No, yeah, this is definitely not the type of movie where you're supposed to worry about how the time travel works.
Right.
It just does.
It is interesting. Of course, it's always an interesting concept. You know, like they mentioned, go back and kill Hitler, but then there's also the, like they were doing in the 20s, go back and buy crappy stocks at the time.
Yeah.
And then over the years, it builds up to the point where you're funding a presidential campaign, you know, and that sort of thing. You know, and who can argue that maybe somebody didn't go back? No.
Have you read I haven't read them either, but there's those books about Barron Trump and he lives like on the same. Oh, I gotta look this up real quick.
We'll have to dig that one up.
Yeah, that's a very fun little conspiracy theory.
But as far as Timecop is concerned, you know, like I said, obviously it's one of his biggest commercial successes at the time. It's one that I remember. You know, I mentioned another one. You know, it's towards the tail end of his career, you know, his action career. He definitely does things after this. You know, there's a movie, in fact, I think that the same director does with him that I enjoyed called Sudden Death. It's Die Hard in a hockey kind of thing.
Yes.
In a hockey match. But
Peter Hyams is definitely an underrated director. He's got this other movie which is really fun with Gene Hackman, Narrow Margin.
Okay.
Which is just, it's great. It doesn't deserve the 6.6.
Well, I've never heard of that one, so maybe I'll have to visit it.
Oh, the whole thing like takes place on a train. It's great. Oh, no, I lost what I was going to say. I was busy thinking about these stupid books. In any case, there's a lot of similarities, like they live in the same place and stuff. But you know me, I'm not a big fan of time travel movies.
Right.
I'm not a big fan. I mean, it was always been my biggest complaint with like Avengers Endgame. But if you're going to do time travel, I like the way that Stephen King does it in what's the novel?
11/22/63.
Yes, the JFK one.
Yeah.
I never saw the miniseries.
Hopefully I got the date right. I'm not a historian.
Yeah. But I like the way that they do that where it's like, you know, he goes back and tries to change time, but like, you know, when you mess with time, time messes with you and stuff like that. And they sort of don't like, I guess my main problem with this is that like, I don't understand how like this guy, the what is he? He's a senator, right? Running for president.
Oh yes, Ron Silver.
Yes, Aaron McComb.
Yes,
the character. I don't get how, you know, he doesn't make this change, or he doesn't. What he doesn't leave the company, I guess is the. I don't know what phrase I was looking for.
You kill the other owner of the company and then you own it, duh.
Well, yeah, and then like how does changing that like not affect any other thing that happens in your life?
Right.
Except for the fact that now you can fund a presidential campaign.
Now he hands himself a letter. I'm assuming what that's doing is kind of laying it out for him to make sure he tries to stay on the same track.
That's a good
Now I will
point.
say, okay, so you look at that. At that point, he's already a senator, right? And every senator wants to be president, I'm sure.
Sure.
At that point, you know, they even make a point of saying when they're first doing that walkthrough before that incident, they're first doing the walkthrough with the new senator. And they go back and, you know, you got out of that company. Must have been a big flaw. You know, they point that out. And then, of course, it comes back, which I thought was pretty good. But, yeah, I can see where possibly you could. I mean, like I say, if your aspirations haven't changed since then, like at the time he was planning on being president because that's what every senator is. then maybe that's what we're dealing with, you know?
Yeah, well, and so one thing that I also don't understand is like when he goes back in time to make sure he doesn't, leave the company, why does he go himself? You know what I mean? Like obviously that Jean Claude Van Damme is on to you because they have a whole, confrontation before that. You know that that's happening, and you being the in charge of the committee and overseeing the whole thing, at least presumably, that when an event happens in the past, like they get notified in the present. You know what I mean? So it's like, why would you go yourself? Like, why don't you just send your henchmen?
Yeah, you're in charge of the organization that's there to watch for this stuff and work through it. Sure, you would think that they would definitely know that it's going to happen. I mean, obviously, maybe he knows himself. He couldn't be convinced by anybody else, so he knows he has to go back.
That's a good point.
So what's the line? Never interrupt me when I'm talking to myself. You know,
that was really good.
That works on many different levels, I suppose. But I don't know. I mean, obviously, we've got to have a big bad guy, and of course, Ron Silver is Ron Silver, which he's been in a lot of things where he's kind of that weaselly dude. I think right before this, he was a bad guy in a movie called Blue Steel or something like that. And and the Arrival. Oh boy, someday we're okay. 96, so it might actually fit into our little thing here. Speaking of who was in Hot Shots Part 2.
Oh, was he?
But anyways, we got to have the big bad guy there, right?
Oh, yeah.
And I think that even at the beginning, and you don't kind of notice it, I kind of knew because I know what I was looking for, but there is a shot of somebody in our guy's house right before the place blows, and it's definitely him, right? So that you can kind of tease that a little bit and stuff. So maybe he's just a hands-on kind of guy. Yeah,
I mean, that's a good point. And I mean, they do make a point throughout the movie that like his henchmen are like constantly like screwing things up. So there's certainly a bit of it where he's like, I guess, you want something done right.
Right.
And I'm, you mentioned like being able to see him blow up
Walker.
Yeah. Sloane. You mentioned him blowing up the house and stuff. The other way that I like when you do time travel is if they were to do it in the sense that like you go back in time, but like that's how the events play out.
Right.
Like if we realize don't realize, but in the beginning, it is like the event plays out, and then at the end when we go back in time,
we see why
how the event.
Well, that's
out.
Harry Potter, right? That's which one was that? Or Azkaban, where he goes back in time. Yeah,
one of my favorites.
We find that he's the one, or they're the ones throwing the snail or whatever, and doing the Patronus and stuff. I like that too. I think that, and I was trying to think, remember if that's the way they did it, but obviously there's fighting. There's extra fighting and that sort of thing, so it doesn't quite end up that way.
Yeah, I think the way, like I said, I think this movie, like obviously, I was telling you before during the break that I didn't take as many notes for this movie, and we discussed that I was invested in
right.
it.
Surely that's what it was.
But I will say it was fun and enjoyable. But I think one way to make it like a better film. And obviously, this would make it not a Jean Claude Van Damme film, but to do it would have been to make it like a type of conspiracy thriller,
right?
Which we don't know from the outset that it's Peter. Is that his name? McComb. Whatever.
McComb.
We don't know that it's the senator.
Yes.
But from literally like 10 minutes into the movie,
right?
I mean, like 3 minutes after we jump into the future and he's got the job at tech, he's talking to his partner and his partner's like, it's Senator McComb. Like,
and right off the bat, then too, the first thing he does, conveniently, there's a tour and he confronts McComb right away. So here's this bad guy who's got access to time travel. And the first thing you're doing is antagonizing him.
Yeah.
Yeah. I don't know. I mean, obviously that's the badass action star that's doing that. But I mean, at some point, does he think to himself, my wife died? And that, at one point you got to think that, right?
Yeah.
But it was interesting. I like the way they played with it.
Sorry, you just what you just said made me realize that that's another way to add like an extra dimension to this movie and make it better. Is if you had made like a big deal out of the fact that his wife got exploded and he never really knows why. And so he's like constantly searching. And then he finds out that it's, this or whatever.
Well, it was interesting. So we did our 10-year jump. And of course, this has the perils of some movies of I'm curious. I don't remember cars like that in 2004. We went from 94 to 2004.
My note for that scene is that limo is preposterous.
Oh, yeah. We're driving in that thing. And and of course, self-driving cars, all he has to do is say, take me home, and it takes him home.
Yeah.
Which I think was a good play on the fact that when he comes back and things are fixed, and taking him home actually takes him to the other home.
Yeah.
Not as whatever crappy apartment he is in as a superhero. But
it's an easy way of doing that. I do like that. And I mean, they're only, like 20 years off because we're just now starting to get self-driving cars.
I know, but I don't even think in those cars could you sit in there and say, take me home, and it goes. I don't know.
No. Well, and I was watching a thing. They have got those Waymo cars and stuff.
Right.
You can't put stuff in the front seat. Like, you just have to sit in the passenger, leave this whole section open, and watch it turn the wheel.
Well, of course you do.
Oh, it's ridiculous. One thing that I was thinking about just now, why did they go back in time and blow up his wife in the house? Like, why was that? Because, again, it's not the type of movie where you see things happen and at the end you figure out why or how they happened.
Right.
It's like it's a different event. So it's like, why did they do that?
It definitely feels like, so this must have happened before, and it must have failed for him or something. You know what I'm saying? At some point, so if we think about the circular time thing here, we've got to assume. Yeah, you're right. I don't know. We got to assume that because they went back and it actually worked, but then he fixed. Don't ask me.
There's multiple plot holes throughout this. This is the problem with time travel.
Yes, if they could fix this, we'd be fine.
Yeah, no. It was. They really never addressed that. I didn't think about that while I was watching the movie until just now.
Yeah. So inadvertently, yes, you encourage the guy who's going to bring you down. I'm not sure, because at some point, I mean, obviously he's in that meeting, so he knows that the TEC is going to be formed. They're offering him the job,
right?
So the senator knows it is being formed. So maybe they go out and kill the guy there. I don't understand.
Yeah,
There's definitely a different timeline going on here. We're talking, we're talking Terminator, where going back changes it and it's a timeline change, but there was a timeline before that went a different way, kind of thing.
Yeah, and I gotta say, we're sort of spoiler alert, I guess, a little bit. not that we've spoiled anything else in the events of this episode, but at the end, like when he fixes everything,
right?
Although still changes the past. When he fixes everything and he comes back to the present, he said he goes home and he's greeted, by like his child.
Mm-hmm.
I have to imagine that there would be nothing worse in the world than like waking up and coming home one day and realizing that you missed 10 years of your child's life.
There's nothing there. I mean, I guess it's one of those things where at least you got a child now, but up to this point, you're right. You don't have any memories of that. Now I got to think, okay, so if we're going to logic the crap out of this, we've got when they're in the factory and young Senator McComb gets the scratch. So old Senator McComb, a scar forms right then. So I got to think that means when he fixes things and then goes back to the future, his that's, is it physiology in your brain? So that must rewire just like the facial cells of your scar rewire. So maybe he did get all those memories all of a sudden. It just took him a little bit to get home.
Yeah, now we're really putting things together.
Now we fixed it.
But he still remembers the past. So,
yes.
I mean, we're running into all kinds of issues here.
I got to say, when we talk about going to the past and alternate futures, I think one of the parts that I was having the most fun with, I've seen the movie before, but one of the parts that I was having the most fun with it is his captain. When he comes back and it's an alternate timeline, and then the captain, keeps bugging him about we were friends, and stuff. And then at one point, they get into a fight with the guards and he knocks it. And of course, JC knocks him down. But he's like, was I your only friend? It's that dude really took care of things. That Bruce McGill, of course, he's been around forever.
Yes.
He's a great character actor that we see in a lot of things, but I like the way that he plays with it. Obviously, he enjoys whatever he's doing. So.
Oh yeah, he was definitely a fun character. And then this is where we get our psych connection.
There you go. I knew he was going to be in there.
Not in anything related to time travel or secret government agencies or anything. He's a firefighter.
And there's no time travel aspect in that episode?
Well, I mean, only if you count, Sean being able to like perfectly visualize the past. But no, yeah, he was definitely really fun. And I liked, that was one of the aspects of like the time travel where I felt like it actually played. Yeah. And it was to good comedic value.
Well, and it's kind of fun. You think about this. We didn't spend a lot of time on it, but it's kind of fun that he goes back to an alternate future and he's trying to convince the guy. And the guy who works in a time organization just kind of says, okay, I'm sure this is the case, right? Because he knows, okay, this is obviously they've had, contingencies laid out that this is possible, So at some point he's got to just roll with it. And I just think it's fun,
Yeah, it is. That is definitely a good point. Throughout this, I was thinking like, okay, I mean, if he's so confused here, we're operating under the assumption that nobody ever has actually changed the past. Right. Like nobody's come through, like everybody's stopped everything. Like there's never been a close call.
It is kind of curious because they do, they have whatever computer setup they have that detects these little blips. Yeah. And they say, well, they're minor blips. So obviously there's other stuff going on and they're just not policing everything. It's like, okay, we're not going to pull over the guy speeding. We're going to go to the murder site, or something like that. Yeah. Right. So I wonder if that's the case is there's just been little blips that they don't concern themselves with. And that's, I don't know. So how many people have these sleds? Obviously they talked about the prototype and everything. There's rumors of another sled somewhere else. Yeah.
Well, and they make mention that Iran, I think, has made like 6 attempts to assassinate, was it Jimmy Carter at Camp David? 79. Yeah, that was Jimmy Carter. So, presumably there's all kinds of other things going on. But then this is another problem that I have whenever you run into a situation like with like a time travel agency. Right. And this is mitigated in like the more modern, like TVA from Marvel. Like they get around this by saying that they're outside of time. Right. But like, I don't understand like why you can go through like a day normally and like the day, like you can go through weeks and like one day there's a problem in the past and then someday, there's a problem in the past. Would there not always constantly be problems in the past?
It definitely, everything would have changed at some point. Yeah. Like you say, having that supernatural TVA outside of things is one thing. I mean, it's also, if you remember Star Trek Generations, right? They're caught in the Borg go back and the Enterprise can see the changes they made to the Earth because they're caught in a temporal wave or some other gobbledygook, right? Yeah, it's that kind of thing that does it. And like you mentioned, our Max Walker, he remembers everything that's happened in all these different alternate realities or time changes and stuff like that. So how is that possible? If we are logicking out the fact that scars happen and brains change, then his should have changed too. But yeah, I mean, it's also convenient that when he comes back in the alternate timeline, they're just taking apart the thing right then. I mean, if the senator really wanted to cause problems, he would have taken the thing apart a week ahead of time so that he couldn't come back on the sled.
Well,
right?
I mean, and also, couldn't he just have not like set up the committee? Couldn't they have just like not done the thing? Like, if you're really thinking about it, like, I don't understand.
Well, so we got to have enough of a prototype that he can steal, because they say he's using some prototype that's a couple hours away from DC. So obviously they've got to get the everything set up, the funding to do that first before they can I don't know. Don't ask me these things.
Yeah.
We're not here for this. We're here for fun. We haven't even talked about Jean Claude Van Damme kicking and punching people, and that's what we're here for.
Oh, yeah. I mean, I didn't even. There was actually, that's a good point. There was surprisingly little fighting in this. Like much
there
less than
was. I mean, there was the fight in his apartment, which is obviously the iconic scene of him doing the splits in his underwear to avoid the electricity. There's the fighting at the end. Yeah, the big battle fight scene at the end. Maybe wasn't anything too martial artsy, right?
Yeah.
We're just talking. I mean, this is leaning a little bit more into the the Schwarzenegger punch him up action kind of thing, right? Obviously, he's throwing roundhouse kicks all the time because that's how he rolls. But it's definitely not. It's not a kung fu movie for sure, right?
Yeah, definitely. Now, I do want to say one thing. I had mentioned earlier that the effects, they were hit or miss. Like the time travel effects, by and large, I thought were good. The same matter, same place thing looked terrible, which is a separate thing. But
right.
like, why? Like, why can't the same matter? I mean,
when they do that effect, his clothes disappear. That's not the same matter.
Yeah.
Right? So why would they blend in? Yeah.
Well, and I mean,
it should be a red blob with clothes on.
Yeah. Well, and so what is it's the present is 2004,
right?
And then the past is 1994, right?
Yes.
So it's 10 years. Don't they say like every cell in your body like regenerates every 7 years? So it's not even the same.
It's
person.
not even the same. So well, maybe it regenerated different. No, I don't know.
But so that scene was obviously terrible. And then, or that effect was obviously terrible. And then after that, when the house explodes and Jean Claude is like carrying, what's her actual name? Melissa, his wife.
Right.
I called her Sloane earlier.
Right.
From Ferris Bueller.
Of course.
When they're running away from the house and, the explosion happens and he goes, ah, like the green screen there was just horrible. It was just terrible.
Yeah. So where are we at here? We're post Jurassic Park. Well, no, we're close to Jurassic Park. So we're still a little iffy when we're doing this stuff. I mean, we're talking about when things are production. And of course, this is an action sci-fi movie. So maybe it doesn't warrant the same thing. I didn't even look to see what their budget was for this thing.
I want to say, I don't remember actually. I looked it up earlier. 27
million, right? So yeah, it's acceptable, I suppose, but I don't know.
But at the same time, I mean, again, like we're going back to the director here, Peter Hyams. This is like he's an explosion guy, like narrow margin in the opening scene. They're in like a forested. I was going to say wooded. A forested area, where there's this big house, and they're in Canada or something, and then the house just explodes, and that's a legit explosion. And I have to imagine that, like, when they film the house exploding in other scenes, that it's real. It's just when Jean Claude is running away that it's a terrible scene.
Well, you got to remember he's from the future, so things look different in the background for him.
Sure. Oh, man. Yeah, there was a lot of things in this movie where I was like, what are we doing here? Like, for example, we mentioned the kitchen fight scene or the apartment fight scene when Jean-Claude he's holding the knife and there's the goon who's like trying to stab him and stuff. Jean Claude is just like holding the knife there, and the villain's just going right for the knife. And then sometimes he'll go down, and so Jean Claude will go.
Well, he's got to clink. When you're doing a knife fight, you got to make things clink. But obviously, Jean Claude is not a knife expert, so the stunt guy was really helping him out there. I did notice that too. There was 4 shots, and we got to find it and YouTube it or something. Get a little GIF going on something, but. It's crazy how some of the stuff they're doing there.
It is bad.
And he had 2 of them. I don't understand. I mean, obviously, I don't know how to kill someone with knives, but I feel like I would have a little better expectation.
Well, and I would imagine the first rule of trying to kill somebody with a knife is stabbing them anywhere where they're not holding something to block it.
Right.
And then there was another scene.
Well, no. Now, listen, I think we've got to look at Star Wars to this because Star Wars... nowadays the lightsaber fighting is all about just big flashiness, and then you get that strike. So maybe that's what he's doing. He's doing lightsaber flashiness just to distract him, and then he's going in for the kill.
Well, it almost worked very well.
Yes,
almost. And then the other part that really irritated me was when we get to the end, and Macomb has he's got the gun,
Right.
and he's gonna shoot. Oh geez, what happens? Oh, so Jean Claude pushes the young Macomb into the old Macomb,
Right.
and old Macomb just stands.
There's
there.
no shot right there. Well, and so even right before then, though. Okay, so we're talking same matter, same space thing, right? That's everybody knows that's not a thing you do. So the henchman is going in there, and he is holding old Van Damme, and young Van Damme is at the window with a gun, and it's like, okay, here's your attack. You've got your special weapon. Push old Van Damme into young Van Damme. Instead, what he does is he pushes him forward about 5 feet and then just pushes him out of the way to then jump out the window and tackle young Van Damme. And I'm thinking, okay, if you know, obviously there, I think at some point they did say nobody's ever seen it happen, but they know it can't work. It's like, okay, but still, I mean, you've got your weapon right there. Just go for it. Yeah, I mean, the fight choreography was interesting. I mean, again, so, and one thing I didn't mention when we were talking about Kickboxer earlier is Kickboxer actually, Jean Claude Van Damme did all the fight choreography. You know, we talked about how it was him and, I guess we did mention it was him and the stunt double that Mark Qissi that worked through it together and set up all the choreography and that kind of thing, which is kind of cool. And obviously Van Damme having his dance history and his stunt double right there, who he's always worked out with, that worked out great. In this instance, yeah, there didn't feel like there was necessarily a ton of choreography from that standpoint. It really was. It did feel more like a you know, what I would envision a cop movie or something like that.
Yeah,
right?
I mean that obviously makes sense given, you know, the name of the film, Timecop.
Right.
But yeah, no, the fighting, it was definitely very lackluster. I mean, again, it's only 5 years later, but it looked like the type of thing where it's like, okay, is Jean Claude getting old here? Like, can he just not do it as well?
Well, at this point, he might be getting too rich too. I think at one point they said that one of the main reasons that he fell, you know, I mentioned that this is towards the end of his career that I know of. And one of the reasons is because there were some contract negotiation where they wanted to sign him on for a 3-picture deal or something like that. And he just said he held out for $20 million a picture, which is what Jim Carrey was making at the time, which I think I remember the news being that he was one of the largest paid actors at the time. It was a pretty big news story, like $20 million a picture or something.
That's crazy.
So he held out for that, and the studio said, no, your movies do not bring in the same numbers that Jim Carrey movies do at the time. I mean, we're talking Dumb and Dumber and, you know, Liar, Liar, you know, and those kind of things.
Sure.
So he held out for that. And he has said in later interviews that was kind of dumb, and he feels kind of stupid that he did that. It was more about making sure he got the recognition, and he didn't quite think it through. And that kind of, like I said, it kind of became his downfall as far as Jean Claude Van Damme goes. And of course, we started this episode talking about the fact that we just, you know, it's JCVD. We're doing a couple movies. I mean, after this, or I think it was like 6 months later, was the Street Fighter adaptation that came out, which was Raul Julia's last movie. I'm sure he's proud of that. And then there was the Sudden Impact. There was a few other ones after this, but by this time, yeah, he's going downhill, and he is not pulling in the movies he was. This was his highest grossing one. Again, it was a flash in the pan kind of thing, as far as I'm concerned. So talking Kickboxer and now this kind of gives us the beginning and ending of what I would call my, you know, if we're basing this whole YouTube video series on movies I'm making you watch because they were influential to me.
Yeah.
This is my Jean Claude Van Damme influence, right? It's that one to this one.
Yeah.
And that's really what we got here.
Yeah. No, that's weird. I mean, again, yeah, you say flash in the pan. It's only like 5 years, and this is definitely the type of guy who I would imagine could be doing like these, you know, really low budget, you know, cult classic action movies for like 10, 15 years.
Yes.
Like, again, we made the discussion or the comparison earlier to Arnold. I don't really see that big of a difference between these two guys.
No. Think of him, you think of Bruce Willis, right? Bruce Willis is an action guy. Of course, he didn't start out an action guy, but he was doing things all the way to the end. And of course, we know, you know, there's a sad story to that in the fact that he was just trying to make sure he could provide for his family. So he did a ton of straight to video, that kind of thing. Mm-hmm. I've heard that some of them are pretty good. Some of them are not.
Sure.
But I agree with you that this should be his the JCVD trajectory as well. He should just be running this stuff, and he probably, if he had been, maybe would have done more in Expendables. But I think when it came down to the Expendables movie, which brought all those guys back, I think he kind of, if I remember right, I think it was him. The story was, he kind of was a little hoity-toity for the whole thing, right?
Really?
I think he came in on one of them. If I don't know for sure. But I don't think it was he wasn't necessarily one that everybody enjoyed on set because he kind of had an attitude about things, but which is too bad. Like I said, I've seen him in an interview for that Prime thing there, and he's kind of joking around with the interviewee and stuff. It seemed like a fun thing. So yeah, it looks like only Expendables 2. So I mean, I do think he was just kind of a quick kind of add-in. He's a villain. But.
Well, yeah, that's his name, Villain.
Yeah, we may have to go watch the after we do our
Randy Couture.
Oh yeah, after we do our Schwarzenegger and we do some of those old. We got some old Stallone movies we can run through. I think we we have to do a Expendables retrospective.
That makes a lot of sense. That would be fun. I don't think I've actually seen any of them, so
well, it'd be worth it then.
Even though these are. When was the first one made? So the second one's 2012.
I think I've seen the first one. I don't know if I've seen the second one or not.
2010.
2010, yeah.
So this is definitely outside our traditional purview here.
Yeah, and there's
movies that are made before I was born.
And there, I've heard a lot of stories about those, so there's some stuff we can probably delve into those movies. But
I didn't realize that the most recent one just came out like 2 years ago.
Oh yeah, they're still rolling.
Wow.
Expendables New Blood has a lot of newer action stars that are retired. So
that's funny. I hope that they keep this franchise going just as long as not Fantastic Four, Fast and Furious is going.
I don't know. These guys are a lot older than the Fast and the Furious crew. The Fast and the Furious. That's a different kind of movie.
Oh man. Well, Dad, do you have any final thoughts?
I don't think so. Again, I would encourage, for anybody who kind of enjoys this stuff, I would encourage more Jean Claude Van Damme. I would encourage, like I said, The Quest. I would encourage Sudden Death, the Die Hard, and the hockey game. And I am kind of curious, like I said, as soon as I get back into the old Amazon Prime, I think I'm going to pop in that Jean Claude Van Damme and just check it out because the trailer looks kind of fun.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, it definitely looks fun. But yes, so final thoughts, definitely Timecop, better than Kickboxer, pretty fun, not exactly the best movie.
Well, according to IMDb, Timecop is worse than Kickboxer.
Well,
I don't think those ratings, I don't believe in those anymore.
I don't trust that. Yeah, no, that's definitely, that's just because a lot of fighters are
It's
attacked.
Definitely not 2 stars below Willow. I'll tell you that right now.
No. Definitely not as good as Willow.
Well, yeah, but 2 stars bad?
Maybe like I'd probably give it like 0.5. I definitely got to rewatch Willow. But in any case, I think we are going to leave it there. So make sure that you like and subscribe for more reviews. Leave a comment down below. Let us know what you thought of Kickboxer and Timecop. And make sure that you subscribe to our social medias at New Wave Nerds to find out what My Father Before Me movie we're going to be reviewing next. And we will see you guys next time.